Now that the Diddy case is wrapped up, a lot of people are starting to look back on the case and have theories about different things. One of the strongest theories that I've seen so far is about those sex tapes. We've seen over the last month, the prosecution took some heavy charges off the table, and then ultimately leading up to him being found not guilty on 3 of the heaviest of the 5 charges. And now the prosecution is seeking about 4 to 5 years as his sentence. So it makes you wonder, what was this really all about the sex tapes? But before we do that, y'all hit that follow, y'all hit that like button, comment below what your thoughts are. Bandana B. Let's get into it.
Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial had little to do with sex trafficking and racketeering, and everything to do with our federal government getting its grimy little hands on those freak-off sex tapes. All you had to do was pay attention to the last 2 months in criminal court, and you'd quickly realize that federal prosecutors were doing a horrific job at proving their main argument. Actually, I'd also argue that they did a better job at proving that Cassie, Diddy's ex-girlfriend, was the one who was orchestrating the sex trafficking, because in court, she admitted to paying these sex workers, and she also admitted to being the one to orchestrate a lot of it. Even in text messages, she was sitting there and typing, because she didn't deny that this was her, saying that she'd rather have a female sex worker than a male sex worker in one of these sex parties. Folks, the reality of it here is RICO is a very tough charge to make stick. In fact, most criminal attorneys can't really even detail it and what it means to a jury. That's just the reality behind all of this. And unfortunately, our federal government did a horrible job at proving RICO, because you're trying to say that Diddy was the one running a criminal enterprise, and yet you only have one person charged. Folks, how do you run a criminal enterprise with only one person? It doesn't seem to make much in the way of sense, unless you're just trying your very best to throw anything at the wall and hope something sticks. And that's very likely what happened here. But the reality of it is you have the federal government arguing that Diddy was sex trafficking victims. But who were those victims? Well, it's important to note that there's a consistency here with not only Diddy's criminal case, but Ghislaine Maxwell. That consistency is James Comey's daughter. She was the lead prosecutor in both of those cases, and she also argued sex trafficking in both of those cases, but didn't tell you who those sex trafficking victims were being trafficked to. Now, we know that Diddy did film a lot of these freak-offs. We don't know how many, but we know that there's video footage, and a lot of these victims said that it was used against them as blackmail. But the reality of it is we never knew who was in those sex parties. Why? That's strange. We didn't hear about it either when we were talking about Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal trial. Our federal government does an incredible job at covering for those who are participants in sex trafficking, but they won't out them. Now, why is that? Well, now our federal government has these freak-off tapes. They showed the most innocent screenshots to the jury. They didn't play the video in criminal court, of course. But the reality of it is this. Prosecutors intentionally failed. That is my true belief. I don't believe that they actually really had a case here to bring up in regards to RICO and sex trafficking. They did their very best to intentionally just make it look like they were arguing that. But the reality of it is they did a better job at arguing that Diddy's ex-girlfriend, who is a domestic violence victim, was the one orchestrating most of these sex parties. So what's going to happen here? Well, we don't really know, right? We just know that he's been now found guilty on 2 out of the 5 charges he was facing. Now, the most severe charges he was found not guilty on, and he's facing on those 2 charges, he's facing a max of 10 years in prison for each count. But the reality of it is this is his first criminal conviction, and so it might be just a slap on the wrist for him. Folks, the reality is this. Cassie made these accusations in civil court when she filed a lawsuit against Diddy. She was paid $20 million allegedly to settle that case. Actually, I think it even came out in court. She also admitted that she was participating in these sex parties when she had mouth sores. Now, there was another individual, another sex worker, who years prior to the criminal trial filed a lawsuit against both Cassie and Diddy and claimed that during these sex parties that he had contracted herpes. And well, they paid his silence and paid him multi-millions of dollars. That came out as well. So folks, the reality of it is this. It doesn't appear to be a sex trafficking case at all. What it appears to be is our federal government trying to get blackmail on A-list celebrities. And they did so by raiding Diddy's home, getting those tapes, not telling the public who was on those tapes, of course. But now I'm sure they'll be holding it over their heads for the rest of their lives. We'll see if Diddy's sentenced at all in this case. I don't think it's going to be much because, again, this is his very first criminal conviction. But all of these cable news legal analysts are sitting here telling you that, oh, Cassie's such a victim here. Cassie's a victim of domestic violence. Diddy was never criminally charged with domestic violence. She actually didn't want to talk to prosecutors, to detectives, when she was caught on tape being the victim of domestic violence. So the reality of it is this. Prosecutors did not do a good job at outlining their argument at all. They had 2 months to do so. They wasted your taxpayer money on this criminal trial, and it's very likely that Diddy's going to be a free man very, very soon. So again, we just witnessed our federal government try to get its grimy little hands on more blackmail material, and it's very, very likely that nothing severe will come of this. In fact, Diddy might even win on appeals.
Now, there's going to be a lot of theories that emerge from this, but based on everything that we've seen with them dropping some of the charges and the way that they went about this whole case, this whole trial, we know that there were some well-known people who also participated in these freak-offs. He used tapes and recordings to threaten people, to extort people. So the fact that the prosecution carefully stitched their story and weaved everything around that part without dropping any names, revealing anybody who might have been there, being very sensitive about it, it does make you wonder. It does, especially when you got the whole Epstein list that's never dropped and never came out. It does make you wonder. A, they got a conviction, so they don't have to return these sex tapes. That's one. And B, was this really about who was in them sex tapes? Because they were very careful to make sure that no high profile names came out. And think about it, even if you were to leak one name, you still run the risk of that person then saying, yeah, I was there, and so was this person. And then that other person might be like, yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like they were very, very careful in making sure we found out a bunch of things about Diddy, but not things about who was involved in these sex parties outside of the sex workers they had testifying. What y'all think, man? I think this is plausible. I think this has some legs. I ain't gonna hold you. I definitely do. Y'all get in the comments below. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe, hit that like button. Thank you. Bandana B. Till next time. Food for thought. Y'all do dishes. I'm